Hoo-yah!
Okay guys, today we're going to talk about Java classes and why they're important. This is going to be a quick introduction to how to implement them, how to use them, what they're good for, and by the end I'm hoping you will feel comfortable enough to at least be able to explain and maybe even do some code. So my objectives: Java classes, I'm going to go over why they're important. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of simple inheritance, and I'll explain a little bit more of what that means later on. And then I'm going to give you 3 tasks. Ultimately, those 3 tasks really combine into one task. So don't get confused. There really is just one big task with 3 different independent sections to it. So let's talk a little bit first about object-oriented programming. And what is an object? An object is something that if we as humans were to look out a window, or if we were to walk around our house, it's how we describe things. We think of microphone. We think of lens cap, little robot guy, you know what I mean? Like, this is an object in our mind. That's how we describe it. So, looking out the window, an example would be trees, cars, buildings, people, and various other things. So, why do we do object-oriented programming? It allows us to think about objects the way we do in real life, and we are programmers. So, if anything that we can do to bring coding more to what we understand is going to make our life a lot easier. In Java now, you use class to actually define the values and functionality of an object. So imagine you want to have a class that describes a tree. You would define that as a class in Java, and then you would add functionality to it, such as grow leaves, drop leaves. Maybe it's drop seed, maybe it's drop pine cone. Think about things in those type of ways. Anything functional can actually make that a little bit easier for you to kind of grasp the concept of class. And now, you've written your code one time. You have a single class. You can actually instantiate multiple versions of that class to make multiple trees. And each of those trees can have that same functionality that you've already coded. So, reusing complex functionality, ease of just understanding the concept of what you're coding, those are all the reasons object-oriented programming is so important for you to understand. So starting from the very beginning, if you were to go into Android Studio and your IDE is probably very similar, right-click on the location that you actually want to put your class files, hit New, Java Class. What you will do is get a pop-up window with some information to fill out. All I changed in this one in Android Studio is the name FPV drone. For those of you that aren't aware, on the right side here I have a first-person view drone called the B-Fight 210. This is my personal drone, and I felt like it would be fun for us to walk through the process of how we would model that together. So once done, some part of this will probably be generated for you, but I did want to call out the pieces, right? So you still have public. Public comes before class. It also can be private. Public means that class can be instantiated from anywhere. Class specifies that what you're about to describe is an object. FPV drone is how you're going to reference those instances in the future, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Inside, I've actually added a constructor. The constructor literally just has the access modifier, which when you're beginning Java should always be public. Just keep that in your mind, should always be public, but know that it could be a different access modifier. And then the name of the class with open close parentheses, and then you put your initialization functionality inside there. Pretty easy to understand, but if you needed the same functionality on destruction, it's a little bit harder in Java. So if you come from another language, there is no real concept of destructors. Now, another thing that I noted is classes typically are in their own Java file. That's my personal preference, and I would recommend that to you guys too starting out. Name your file fpvdrone.java and put all your functionality for that FPV drone in there. It just becomes a lot easier to manage. There are always exceptions to every rule, and there may be reasons why you'd want to have multiple classes in another class, for example. But we're talking about beginning stuff here. Just know that things that I'm telling you, there are always exceptions to them. But for now, make them in their own file. So I've added a couple variables. Max speed, max pitch, min pitch, yaw speed, roll speed is disabled. All the things that you would see, a drone actually needing to do for controls. And these are very simple examples of that. But I made them all protected so that they could actually be accessed by outside of this class. And I'll show you why that's important in a minute. So let's, back in the FPV drone class, if we were to scroll down and we were to add a new function called public void on update. It is public, so make sure you pay attention to that. And then just do a system.out println on update fpv drone.java. And so now you've added some functionality. So maybe the FPV drone class needed an update. Now, let's make a class specific to my bfight 210. We're going to do that same steps again where we right click and add a new class. But instead, we're now going to add as a superclass FPV drone. If you start to type in there, you actually see the packages get filtered out. So make sure you're picking the right one if for some reason there were multiple by the same name. Everything else is the default other than the name of the new class and the superclass. So I've modified the bfight class a little bit, and I've added an override function, which I call public void on update. Notice that the on update is also in the FPV drone class. And we know this is an override function because we've tagged it as an override function with the @override. But also, if you look at the very first line of code I have on the screen, I've got extends FPV drone. So basically anything that we've written in FPV drone now lives in bfight 210. If we start with the constructor, now one error that I actually have here is I definitely prefer actually specifying public here, and I left that off in this document. So just remember that it should be public bfight 210, and then I've got the super open and close parentheses called in there. That will call into the parent constructor. Then, if you look in the override function that I have here, I'm actually doing a super.onUpdate. Using the word super will call up one level. In this case, it happens to be FPV drone. So if you were to run this code, what you would end up getting is the print line that I had for FPV drone, and then the print line that I have in the bfight 210 class. Another thing I wanted to point out, notice now that if I wanted to change the parameters or the values of the defaults in the bfight class, I can do that in the constructor. I can go in and set max speed equals to 250 because I declared them as protected. So anything that derives from that, and in Java, anything that's in their package can actually reference them. So imagine I had a button, and that button actually worked to spawn a new drone. Maybe it's a tower defense game, and you wanted to spawn a drone onto the field because you paid some currency. I wanted to show you how easy it is to create a new object, instantiate. So you may have heard me say that a few times, but also call functions on it and modify the variables on it. So I've declared bfight 210 drone is equal to new bfight 210. That actually instantiates a new object, and that object is a standalone object that you can do what you want with at that point. I can now call drone.onUpdate. That will instantiate the print lines that we actually have in those functions in the order we already talked about. Another thing I did want to point out is in other languages, if you came from C++, Java protected does not only keep it to the hierarchy of classes, it actually keeps it also to anything within the same package. So if I were to have this code outside of, for example, maybe I had this on a UI of some kind, so this wasn't in the hierarchy of FPV drone or bfight 210, ideally I would not like max pitch to be accessible. But just know that it is, and I would still say it's a good habit not to do that, and in another class we'll talk about setters and getters and a better way to actually handle that rather than having direct access to those variables. So let's bring it all together. We're going to make a media class, and we're going to think of a couple, maybe 5 attributes that describe media. And then we're going to make 2 subclasses of that, 2 derived classes, video and video game, and each one of those we're going to add 2 new attributes. And then I want you just to look at writing some code for how to actually instantiate these classes. Okay guys, so now that we have a project open, let's jump in and actually create a new class called media. And we're going to keep everything else default. Pay attention to the package name. You're going to need that in a little bit because I picked some pretty bad naming here, and you'll see why in a little bit. So let's first go and add in the constructor. And remember, that is public media, open and close curly brackets. So things that you can think about for media that are going to be common among at least videos and video games. So we're going to make protected string, and I'm going to start with the title. Every media item probably has a title and an artist. So let's just do that. And if we were to think about, another one would be volume. So we would add volume, and I'm actually going to make that a float. And the reason I'm making it a float is typically volume is from the scale of 0 to 1, so 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, all the way up to 1. So just something that's kind of funny. A lot of people will do integer for that. Maybe we want to do something along the lines of the number of tracks. So we would do like, no, here's an even better one. So duration. And maybe we make this in milliseconds or something like that. You know, we use an integer value for the actual length of it. Maybe that doesn't make sense in video games, but for now we're just using this as an example. And then let's see here. Maybe there's a creation date. The date that the media was created. That's pretty much it. Don't worry too much about the actual 5 parameters. You could have done something completely different, and I'm totally fine with that. So let's go make a new class. And here's why it's important to remember which package that we had. Because as I type media in here, pick the one here that's the name of your package. And now if I hit OK, I'm actually going to be extending the right class. And we want to add a couple more in here. We're going to say, let's do, for video games, so it'd be, maybe there's a boolean is mature, and it defaults to false. And maybe we have a rating, so maybe let's say, let's do an integer. This would probably actually be an enumeration. And the rating would be something like 0 to 10, where 10 is, needs to be, actually, let's do this. Let's do Metacritic review. That's kind of fun. So we default to 5. I think it actually goes 50, right? Because it's 0 to 100. So now what we've done is we've created a video game, which extends from our media class. So if we were to make a video game constructor, we could actually take and mess with volume, because maybe we want the volume to default to 1.0f, for example, or 10 if you were to think about it in the terms of integer. So it's cool because we have all our functionality written in media into video game. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make one called video. And again, make sure you select the right class. And notice that I'm now using media in 2 different ways. Let's make them protected. But this could be, maybe this is bitrate, integer bitrate is equal to maybe 44. Integer, with videos, it could be comments is equal to 0. So, and then in another section, let's just talk about how we'd actually instantiate that. So I'm going to go back to my main activity that I have here. And I'm going to clear out this function from one of our old things. And we're going to just pretend we're going to pretend that we're going to make this a void, and we're going to call this instantiate. And then now if we were to go, we'd do video game, vGame is equal to new video game, and then we could do video, and make sure we select the right one because it does look like there's a couple of, I'll just do lowercase video. So now I've created two objects, one for video game and one for video, and I could do that as many as I wanted. So if I had a catalog of 100 games, I could create 100 video game instances. And just know that eventually you could add parameters to your constructors to make that a little bit more powerful, and you can do the same thing to video. So if you wanted to pass in the title, for example, so that you can't create a video game unless there's a title for it. So you had some way to classify it. I hope that helps you guys, and if you have any questions, make sure you leave comments, reach out to me personally. I will do my best to help you. And until next time, guys, take care.